Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel, where today I will be talking about the life of Eric the Red, the famed Norse explorer who established the first European settlement in Greenland. My name is Zach the History Dog. I am the host, and we do stuff here. But before we get into the video, if you like what I do and would like to support me, then check out the links in the description below. Thank you all so much, and let's begin. Alright, so this is Zach the History Dog. We're going to be taking a look at the life of Eric the Red, the man considered to be the founder of the first European settlement in Greenland. So let's get into it. Okay, so we can start off by saying that when it comes to historic figures, there's never enough sources to go around, meaning historians have to settle for whatever bits and pieces they have to work with. However, in the case of Eric the Red, we actually have quite a lot of written accounts of his life. The problem though is that these sources are somewhat biased. In fact, all of our sources come from two main Icelandic sources, the 13th century Greenland Saga and the 14th century Labrador Saga, both of which were written down more than 200 years after Eric's death, and both of which were created to glorify the descendants of Eric's son, Leif Erikson. This doesn't mean that the sagas are completely made up, but it does mean that these sagas are definitely biased towards Eric and his family. With that said, let's dive in. So according to the sources, Erik Thorvaldsson was born around the year 950 CE in the Jæren district of Rogaland, Norway. His father was Thorvald Asvaldsson, who, as the story goes, was banished from Norway for killing a fellow at a feast. Thorvald would then sail west to Iceland and settle there in the Borgar district in the south, and it was here that Thorvald and his wife, presumably named Astrid, had their first child, a son whom they named Eric. We don't know exactly what year Eric was born, but given that he would live to around 53 years old, and that he explored Greenland around the year 980, I figured 950 would make the most sense. It should also be noted that the sources state that Eric had a brother named Thorstein, although some scholars believe that Thorstein may have actually been Eric's half-brother. When Eric was just a teenager, his father, Torvald, would kill a fellow at a local chieftain's funeral, and because of this, the family would be forced to flee to the nearby Hvammar district, where they would live as outcasts for 3 years. 3 years later, however, King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark would conquer Norway, and Torvald would be pardoned and allowed to return to Borga. But trouble would strike again when Thorvald accidentally killed a slave while hunting, so once again, Thorvald and his family would be forced to flee, this time sailing to the western coast of Iceland in the town of Sutherland. It was in Sutherland that Thorvald would purchase a farm called Bratslide, where he would raise sheep. Eventually, Thorvald would prosper and become fairly wealthy, but as the story goes, one summer Thorvald allowed some of his friends to hold a large party on his farm, and the revelers would end up burning down the house. With no home and few prospects, Thorvald would decide to move his family away from the town and into the unsettled western settlement of Iceland, where Thorvald would purchase land and build a new house. Thorvald would only live another year after this though, dying in the winter of 980. And so, Eric, now a young adult, would take over the family farm. And it was here that Eric met a local woman named Shodhild, Joran's daughter, with whom he would marry, and have 4 children, one of which would be the famed explorer Leif Erikson. Now, as you might imagine, living on the edge of an unsettled wilderness comes with certain problems, namely, people getting murdered. And so Eric would hire a bodyguard named But one day Thorgils would insult Eric's wife, and Eric would banish him from his farm. Thorgils, wanting revenge, would travel to the local chieftain and claim that Eric had just murdered him. And so the chieftain would take a small fleet of ships and sail to Eric's farm, where he would arrest Eric and take him to court. There, Eric would defend himself and claim that Thorgils was lying, but nobody believed him, and so he would be found guilty. Eric would appeal to the King of Norway for mercy, but he would be denied, and so Eric would be sentenced to exile for 3 years. Now, normally, this kind of sentence meant leaving the country, usually for good. But in this case, Eric was allowed to stay in Iceland, but he wasn't allowed to leave his farm or speak to anyone outside of his household. Not surprisingly, Eric didn't feel like staying cooped up in his farmhouse for the next 3 years. And so instead, Eric would set sail across the sea to explore the vast wilderness to the west. He would find no land, but he did find an island inhabited by indigenous people. Eric would name this island Heliland, which literally means grassland. But it seems that the inhabitants of Heliland weren't too happy with Eric's intrusion, and so he would soon sail back home. Over the next couple of years, Eric would explore more of the surrounding waters, including what he named Markland, or Desert Land. and he named this place after its barren rocky landscape. But still, Eric would find no place to settle. However, during one of his voyages, Eric would discover the island of Greenland, and he would establish a trading post there. He even hosted a large feast with the local chieftains, and he named the island after its greenery. So, Eric the Red now had a choice. He could return to Iceland after his exile and continue his life there, or he could settle down in Greenland and try to establish a community there. Given that Iceland was a much more civilized society at this time, it's hard to believe that Eric would choose the latter, but this is what Eric would end up doing. Eric would write a letter inviting 20 of his friends and relatives to join him in Greenland, and many of them would accept. Then in the year 985, Eric would lead a fleet of ships across the sea and establish a settlement in Greenland. Eric's plan was to use his connections in Scandinavia to establish a trade network between Greenland and the rest of Europe. For the most part, this plan worked, and Eric became fairly wealthy. Unfortunately though, the native Greenlanders viewed the Norsemen as outsiders, and so they often clashed. Also, not everyone in the Norse community supported Eric's rule, but still, Eric would maintain control. And after his 3 years of exile were up, he would officially be pardoned by the King of Norway and allowed to keep his fortune. In the last years of his life, Eric would focus on expanding the settlement and converting the natives to Christianity. However, he would not live to see the success of his endeavors. In the year 1003, a harsh winter would grip the island, and it is believed that a disease would sweep through the settlement, killing a majority of the population, including Eric the Red. So there you have it. That was a look at the life of Eric the Red. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like. Also, if you want to learn about other famous Vikings, then stay tuned. But anyways, that is all that I have for you today. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.